Steelers Nation, buckle up because what I'm about to tell you is going to make your blood boil. The franchise absolutely fumbled the bag on draft night, and new details just surfaced that make it even worse than we thought. If you want to stay locked in on every single twist and turn of this team's journey, smash that subscribe button right now. We're breaking down Steelers news every single day, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. Now let's dive into this mess. Alright, so here's the deal. We all remember draft night, right? The Pittsburgh Steelers are sitting there at pick 21. There's excitement in the air. Fans are hoping for a game-changing wide receiver. The buzz around the Steel City is electric because everyone knows this team desperately needs offensive firepower. They've been starving for a legitimate number one receiver ever since the days when they had elite talent catching passes. So draft night rolls around, and what happens? Absolute chaos. Complete and utter chaos that left the entire fan base scratching their heads and wondering what just went down. Fresh reporting has come out over the past several weeks from some really credible sources in Pittsburgh. And let me tell you, it paints a picture that even by Steelers standards is pretty rough. We're talking about a franchise that prides itself on being calculated, smart, and ahead of the curve when it comes to building a roster. But on this particular night, things went sideways in a major way. And the more we learn about what happened behind closed doors, the more frustrated Steelers fans are becoming. It's like watching a car crash in slow motion, except the car is your favorite football team and you can't do anything but watch. Let me set the scene for you. The draft is underway. Teams are making their picks. The Steelers are getting closer and closer to being on the clock. Reports start coming in that Pittsburgh is locked in on wide receiver Mecole Hardman. Now, Hardman is a guy who brings serious speed, serious playmaking ability, and the kind of dynamic presence that can change an offense overnight. Steelers brass is apparently feeling really good about their chances of landing him at 21. They're probably thinking they're about to steal this guy, get incredible value, and add a weapon that Russell Wilson or whoever's under center can actually utilize. The excitement must have been building in that war room. But then, out of nowhere, the Philadelphia Eagles swoop in like a thief in the night. They jump ahead of Pittsburgh and snag Mecole Hardman right from under the Steelers' noses. And here's the kicker that makes it even more painful. According to reports, the Steelers were literally on the phone with Hardman when the Eagles made their move. Can you imagine that? You're sitting there as a front office, talking to the player you want, probably getting him excited about playing in Pittsburgh, discussing what his role would be, painting this beautiful picture of his future in black and gold. And then, boom, another team just snatches him away while you're mid-conversation. That's the kind of gut punch that makes you want to throw your remote through the television screen. Now here's where it gets even more interesting, and this is where the new reporting really sheds light on what went wrong. Christopher Carter from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette has come out and said that after missing out on Hardman, the Steelers went into scramble mode. And I'm not talking about a little bit of scrambling, I'm talking about full-on panic stations. According to Carter, Pittsburgh immediately started trying to trade back. They were calling other teams, trying to find a partner who would give them something valuable in exchange for moving up to that 21 spot. They were shopping the pick hard, trying to recoup some value, trying to salvage what was quickly becoming a disaster of a first round. And you know what tells you everything you need to know about how desperate they were to trade back? The clock. They let that draft clock run down to under a minute before finally submitting their pick. Think about that for a second. Most teams who know exactly who they want will get their pick in relatively quickly. But the Steelers let it run and run and run right down to the wire because they were working the phones trying to find any team willing to make a deal. And apparently, nobody bit. Nobody wanted to trade up to 21 badly enough to give Pittsburgh what they wanted in return. So the Steelers were stuck. They had to make a pick, and they ended up selecting offensive tackle Max Owanu. Now let me be clear about something. This isn't a hit piece on Max Owanu. The kid has legitimate talent. We're talking about a physically gifted offensive tackle with incredible upside. He's got the size, he's got the length, he's got the athleticism that you absolutely dream about when you're evaluating tackle prospects. This is a guy who could legitimately develop into one of the premier right tackles in the entire National Football League. He's got footwork that's genuinely impressive for someone his size. When you watch his college tape, you see a player who can mirror edge rushers, who can handle speed off the edge, who has the raw tools to be really special. He shut down some elite competition in college. His measurables are off the charts. With James Campen coaching him up, one of the best offensive line coaches in the entire league who's been in Pittsburgh forever, Awanu could absolutely blossom into a cornerstone piece of this offensive line for the next decade. But here's the problem, and this is what has Steelers fans so frustrated. If the team was desperately trying to trade back, that tells you something critical. It tells you that in their own evaluation, they didn't think Awanu was worth the 21st overall pick. If they truly believed he was the right guy at the right value at that spot, they would have just taken him. They wouldn't have been frantically calling around the league trying to move down. The fact that they tried so hard to trade back and only took Awanu after they couldn't find a partner suggests they reached. They settled. They took a player they probably had graded lower on their board because they got desperate and didn't have any other options. And for a franchise that prides itself on never reaching, on always getting value, on being smarter than everyone else in the room, that's a tough pill to swallow. Steelers Nation was sitting there watching this unfold on television, and you could feel the confusion and frustration spreading through social media. Twitter was absolutely blowing up with fans trying to figure out what just happened. Some people were trying to convince themselves that Awanu was the right pick all along, that the team knew what they were doing. Other fans were openly upset, questioning why the front office couldn't land the receiver they so clearly needed. There were debates raging about whether Omar Khan and the new regime really knew what they were doing. And honestly, in that moment, it felt like the Steelers had let a golden opportunity slip through their fingers. But wait, it gets even worse. More reporting came out from Gerry Dulac, another respected voice covering the Steelers for the Post-Gazette. And Dulac dropped an absolute bombshell that made the whole situation even more painful. According to his sources, the Steelers had actually tried to trade up earlier in the first round. Specifically, they were in talks with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to move up to pick 15. And why would they do that? To get Mecole Hardman before Philadelphia could snipe him. The Steelers saw the danger coming. They knew Hardman might not make it to 21, so they proactively tried to jump ahead and secure their guy. And here's the crazy part. The deal was apparently close. Like, really close. Pittsburgh and Tampa Bay were working out the framework of a trade that would have sent the Steelers up to 15 and landed them the explosive receiver they desperately wanted. Can you imagine how different draft night would have looked if that trade had gone through? The Steelers would have gotten their man, the fan base would have been ecstatic, and we'd be talking about what a brilliant move it was to be aggressive and go get the playmaker this offense has been missing. But the trade fell apart, and the reason it fell apart is almost poetic in how frustrating it is. Edge rusher Ruben Bain from the University of Miami started falling down the draft board. Bain was projected to go higher, but for whatever reason, teams kept passing on him. He slid and slid until he was sitting there at 15, right where the Buccaneers were picking. And Tampa Bay had Bain on their list of can't-miss prospects. He was one of those guys they had circled as someone they absolutely had to take if he fell to them. So when Bain was still available at 15, the Buccaneers pulled the plug on trade talks with Pittsburgh. They decided to stay put and grab the edge rusher, leaving the Steelers empty-handed and forced to wait until 21. One player falling a few spots completely changed Pittsburgh's entire draft night. That's how razor-thin the margins are in this league, and that's why this whole situation stings so much. Dulac also reported that Hardman wasn't the only receiver the Steelers would have been willing to trade up for. They also loved Carnell Tate out of Ohio State and even safety Caleb Downs. But those guys went way earlier, completely out of range for any realistic trade-up scenario. Still, it shows you that Pittsburgh was willing to be aggressive, willing to move around the board to get impact players. They just couldn't get it done when it mattered most. And for a fan base that's used to seeing their team execute flawlessly on draft night, that's a really bitter pill to swallow. Now let's talk about what happened after the Awanu pick, because the pain didn't stop there. The Steelers are sitting there, probably licking their wounds, trying to regroup and figure out their next move. And then the New York Jets make a trade. They move back into the late first round, giving up a second and a fifth-round pick to jump up and select wide receiver Omar Cooper Jr. out of Indiana. And why does that matter? Because according to multiple reports, the Steelers absolutely loved Cooper. They had him high on their board. They were hoping to potentially trade back into the first round or early second round to grab him. This was a guy they really wanted to add to their receiving core, but the Jets beat them to the punch. And here's what makes it even more frustrating. The Steelers actually had more draft capital than New York. They had the ammunition to make that exact same trade and probably could have beaten whatever offer the Jets put on the table. But for whatever reason, they didn't pull the trigger. Maybe they thought Cooper would fall further. Maybe they were worried about giving up too much. Maybe they were still reeling from the Hardman situation and weren't thinking clearly. Whatever the reason, they didn't make the move, and Cooper ended up in a Jets uniform instead of wearing black and gold. Imagine being a Steelers fan watching all of this unfold in real time. First, your team gets sniped for the receiver they wanted at 21. Then you find out they tried to trade up earlier and couldn't get it done. Then they desperately try to trade back and can't find a partner. Then they settle for a tackle who might be good but clearly wasn't their first choice. And then, to top it all off, another receiver they loved gets taken by a division rival who made the exact kind of aggressive move Pittsburgh should have made. It's layer upon layer of frustration, and it's completely understandable why Steelers Nation was feeling some type of way after the first round. Now, in the spirit of being fair and balanced, let's acknowledge a few things. First, drafts are unpredictable. Things happen fast. Plans fall apart. Even the best front offices in football have nights where nothing goes according to plan. Second, the Steelers did end up getting some interesting players later in the draft. They traded up in the second round to grab wide receiver Jermaine Burton, who's got legitimate talent and could develop into a really solid number 2 option in this offense. There are some who believe Burton has the kind of skill set that reminds them of Adam Thielen, a high-level possession receiver who can move the chains and make plays in crucial moments. If Burton develops the way some people think he can, suddenly that first-round disappointment doesn't hurt quite as much. Third, and this is important, Max Awanu could absolutely prove everyone wrong. He's got the talent, he's got the physical tools, he's got a great coaching staff around him to help him develop. If he turns into a perennial Pro Bowl right tackle who protects the quarterback's blind side for the next 10 years, nobody is going to care that the Steelers tried to trade back on draft night. Results are what matter in this league, and if Awanu produces, all of this hand-wringing will look silly in hindsight. Sometimes the guys you settle for end up being the best players you could have possibly chosen. It happens more often than you'd think in the NFL. But the flip side is also true. If Awanu struggles, if he doesn't develop the way the team hopes, if he turns into just an average starter or worse, a backup, then this draft night disaster is going to haunt the organization for years. Every time Mecole Hardman makes a big play for Philadelphia, Steelers fans are going to wince. Every time Omar Cooper Jr. torches a defense, there's going to be regret. That's the brutal reality of the NFL draft. Your decisions get judged not just in the moment, but over the course of years as these players develop and show what they can really do at the highest level. So, let's play a little game of hindsight, because that's what fans love to do. With the benefit of knowing how the entire draft played out, how could the Steelers have maximized their picks? What would the ideal version of this draft have looked like? Well, if we're being honest, a lot of fans and analysts would have preferred they take Omar Cooper Jr. in the first round over Awanu. Cooper was a dynamic playmaker in college, a guy who could stretch the field and make contested catches. For a team desperate for receiving weapons, that would have been the sexy pick that got everyone excited. Then in the second round, with their pick at 56, Emmanuel McNeill-Warren was still on the board. He's a safety with real coverage skills and the kind of instincts that translate immediately to the NFL. The Steelers ended up taking a cornerback later, but a lot of people would argue safety was a bigger need. Getting McNeill-Warren in round 2 would have addressed the secondary in a major way and given them a potential starter from day one. Sometimes you have to prioritize positions of need, and safety definitely qualified. The Drew Aller pick in round 3 is interesting because he's such a developmental project. Aller is a quarterback with physical tools but raw technique and limited starting experience. The Steelers are betting that with time and proper coaching, he can develop into a franchise quarterback. That's a long-term play, a gamble on potential rather than production. Some people love that kind of pick. Others think you can find developmental quarterbacks later, but Pittsburgh clearly saw something they liked, and when you're searching for a quarterback, you have to take swings when you see talent you believe in. Later in the draft, there were guys like Emmanuel Pregnon, an offensive guard who could have helped solidify the interior of the line. Right now, the Steelers have some question marks at right guard. Is it going to be Spencer Anderson? Brock Hoffman? Somebody else? There's no clear-cut answer, and that's not ideal going into a season where you need your offensive line to be rock solid. Getting Pregnon in the third round could have solved that problem immediately and given the team one less thing to worry about heading into training camp. Defensive tackle was another area where Pittsburgh could have added more talent. Darrell Jackson Jr. was a guy who had some buzz as a run stuffer, someone who could clog lanes and eat up blocks in the middle. With Sebastian Joseph Day on the roster, adding another big body to rotate in and keep everyone fresh would have been smart roster construction. You can never have too many guys who can control the line of scrimmage, especially in a division like the AFC North, where you're going to face physical, run-heavy offenses multiple times a year. The Steelers did make some moves that people liked. Trading down in the fourth round to accumulate more picks was smart asset management. They ended up with extra ammunition to grab more players, and when you're trying to build depth and find hidden gems, having more darts to throw matters. Some of the later picks, like Kyle Lewis, a linebacker-safety hybrid, could turn into really useful pieces. Lewis has the versatility to play multiple roles in a creative defense, and with a defensive mind like their coordinator, he could be deployed in all kinds of interesting ways. Big nickel, money linebacker, coverage specialist, you name it. Those Swiss Army knife players are invaluable in the modern NFL. They also grabbed some interesting receiver prospects later, like Kevin Coleman Jr. out of Missouri, a smaller receiver with excellent route running and reliable hands. Some people compared him to Jordan Addison in terms of his skill set, which is high praise. If Coleman can develop into a slot receiver who moves the chains on third down, that's incredible value for a late-round pick. And in today's pass-heavy league, you can never have too many guys who can catch the football and make plays in space. Special teams also got some attention with picks focused on return specialists and gadget players. Field position matters, and having a dynamic returner can flip games in your favor. The Steelers clearly valued that dimension of the game and allocated resources accordingly. Some fans might think that's a luxury pick, but smart teams understand that championships are won in all three phases, and special teams is often the most overlooked. When you step back and look at the entire draft class, there's definitely talent here. There are players who could develop into starters, contributors, and core pieces of this roster for years to come. But there's also a nagging feeling among the fan base that it could have been better. That with a little more luck, a little more aggression, a little better execution, this could have been a home run draft instead of just a solid one. And in a league where the margins between winning championships and falling short are razor thin, those kinds of missed opportunities can haunt you. So how do we grade this draft? If you're being generous, you give Omar Khan and the Steelers front office a B. They got some good players. They addressed needs. They added depth. But they also had some embarrassing moments, particularly in the first round where everything seemed to go wrong. The Hardman situation was brutal. The failed trade-up attempt stings. Missing out on Omar Cooper Jr. hurts. Those are the kinds of what-ifs that keep fans up at night wondering what could have been. If you're being harsher in your evaluation, maybe you drop it to a B- or even a C+. The first round was rough enough that it drags down the overall grade, regardless of what happened later. And let's be real, first-round picks matter more than any other picks. That's where you're supposed to find your stars, your cornerstones, your difference makers. When you botch the first round, it's hard to fully recover no matter how well you draft later. But here's the thing that Steelers fans need to remember. Drafts take years to properly evaluate. We won't really know how good or bad this class was until we see these players on the field, developing, competing, and producing at the NFL level. Max Awanu could turn into a stud. Jermaine Burton could be a steal. Drew Aller could become the franchise quarterback this team desperately needs. Or the opposite could happen. Players could bust, injuries could derail careers, and in 3 years, we could be looking back at this draft as a complete disaster. That's the beauty and the agony of the draft process. It's all projection, all guesswork, all hoping that your evaluations are correct and that the players you choose can translate their college success to the professional level. Front offices get paid millions of dollars to get these decisions right, and even the best scouts and general managers are wrong more often than they'd like to admit. It's an inexact science, and that's what makes it so compelling and so frustrating at the same time. Looking ahead, the Steelers are going to need these draft picks to pan out if they want to compete in what's shaping up to be a brutal AFC. The conference is loaded with talent. The Chiefs are still the standard. The Bills are dangerous. The Bengals have elite quarterback play. Even within their own division, the Ravens and Bengals are stacked with talent and expecting to compete for championships. Pittsburgh can't afford to whiff on draft classes if they want to keep pace. Every pick matters. Every decision has consequences. And when you stumble out of the gates like they did in round 1 this year, it puts extra pressure on everyone else in the organization to make up for it. Training camp is coming up fast, and that's when we'll start to get our first real look at how these rookies are adjusting to the professional level. Can Awanu handle the speed and power of NFL edge rushers? Does Burton have the polish to contribute immediately, or will he need time to develop? Can Drew Aller show enough in practice to make people believe in his long-term potential? These are the questions that will dominate conversation over the next few months as the team prepares for the regular season. And you better believe Steelers fans will be watching every practice report, every training camp highlight, every preseason snap to try and figure out whether this draft class is going to help or hurt their team's chances this year. The bottom line is this: the Steelers had a chaotic, frustrating, and at times embarrassing first round of the draft. They missed out on players they really wanted. They couldn't execute trades they were trying to make. They ended up settling for a player who might be great, but clearly wasn't their first choice. That's all true, and it's fair to criticize the front office for how things played out. But they also added a bunch of interesting players throughout the rest of the draft who could develop into real contributors. The final verdict won't be written for years, but right now it feels like a missed opportunity to hit a grand slam and instead settling for a solid double. Good, but not great. Acceptable, but not ideal. And for a fan base with championship expectations, that's always going to leave a slightly bitter taste. If you made it this far, hit that like button and let me know in the comments how you'd grade this draft. Are you optimistic about Onwenu and the rest of the class? Or are you still frustrated about missing out on Hardman and Cooper? Drop your grade down below and make sure you're subscribed because we're going to be tracking every single one of these rookies throughout training camp and into the season. Here we go, Steelers.